The fight for freedom continues. This is 2A Today.
The right of the people.
The right of the people.
The right of the people.
Shall not be infringed.
Not be
The right of the people.
To keep and bear.
and bear.
The right of the people.
Shall not be infringed.
Shall not
The right of the people.
Shall not.
be infringed.
Welcome to episode 34 of 2A Today. It's April 2nd, 2015, and I'm your host, YaDaddy. And joining me via Skype from the freedom-loving state of Arkansas is Kevin. How's it going, Kevin?
Everything's going great.
And as a special bonus from the not-so-freedom-loving state of Connecticut, we have the busiest boy in the world, Peter Gould. Good to have you back, Peter. How's it going?
It's good to be back. I spent the last month digging out from under the ice and snow up here in Connecticut.
Oh, yeah, you've been going through that. Was that fun?
Oh, my God, you have no idea.
Does it make you miss your childhood when you used to play in the snow?
Yeah, my childhood was spent sledding. I didn't have to worry about the whole driveway, dig out the mailbox nonsense.
Oh, God.
This was insane this February.
Well, that's the nice thing about being in the South, where we are.
Yeah, I hate you too.
Yeah, we don't quite get that. All right. Well, listen, everyone. It's time for part 3 of our NFA series on 2A Today. Now, the series started with NFA attorney Dean Phillips, where he told us about today's NFA process. Then in episode 33, we heard from Dean Weingarten about the history of NFA and how we got here. Now it's time to talk about how we change this situation. And as it would be, right here in little old Atlanta, Georgia, we happen to have an expert on the subject in the person of Knox Williams of the American Suppressor Association. How's it going today, Knox?
Things are going well. Thanks for joining us today.
Absolutely. Thank you for having us. And you may hear a little bit of a different sound coming from the recording today. We're actually in the offices of the American Suppressor Association here in Atlanta, Georgia, for another in-person interview. These are becoming regular. I kind of like it. All right. So, Knox, before we get into this, we know you're with the American Suppressor Association, but give the audience a little bit of your background, why you're the guy to talk to about this today.
So I've been in the suppressor industry for about 6 years now. I started out in 2009 when I was in college. I started interning for Advanced Armament Corporation, which is a suppressor manufacturer. Back in 2011, helped form the American Suppressor Association and have been working with it since.
All right. Sounds like I got an expert, gentlemen. So let's dig in. All right. Before we get into the information, Peter has a question that he likes to ask. And Peter, I did it such injustice for the last episode. I hope you can redeem it right now. So let him have it.
I haven't asked it in a while.
Yeah.
But I think our regular listeners remember what it's going to be. And it's simply this. All of us who have become what I guess you'd call pro-Second Amendment activists, we all got here somehow. We all started out life as an ordinary citizen, and whether we were into hunting or sports shooting or carried a firearm for self-defense or whatever, we minded our own business. And then sooner or later something happened, or a series of somethings happened, and we all said, okay, I've had enough, and became what we are now. What was your I've had enough moment?
That's a tough one. I think that I've kind of always been a Second Amendment advocate. When I was a kid, about 5 years old or so, I used to go to my grandfather's house and ask him to see his war trophies that he brought back from the Pacific Theater in World War II. Before he'd ever let me see them, he'd sit me down on his couch, put in the Eddie Eagle video from NRA. We'd have to watch it. The stop, don't touch, leave the area, tell an adult. And as soon as that was over, he'd say, okay, we can go look at the guns that we've got. Ever since then, I've just been enamored with firearms. By the time I was in middle school, I was wearing NRA shirts to school. In high school, there were several instances where I was told that I'd either have to take my shirt off or be suspended, and said, well, then you're going to have to suspend me. I never came to that, but it's just always kind of been a part of who I am. And I don't know that there's really a pivotal moment, so to speak, but more just how it's always been.
Yep, fair enough.
Yeah, I was going to ask you if they tried to arrest you for wearing your NRA shirt at school. So I guess they did. All right. So let's get this started. This whole NFA series on 2A Today started with me deciding that I wanted a really cool Yugoslavian M92. And it's a little too much fun for the government, evidently. And there's this process that I have to go through. And I started doing my discovery on this. And it led me to this series of shows because I wanted to explore this and have everyone hear what I've been going through, the history, the process, all of this stuff. I wanted you to experience this also. But now I'm going to tell you specifically my story, what I've been through over trying to get this Yugoslavian M92 into the state of being a real functioning firearm. And it actually started back in about 2008, 2009, back in the good old days of AK parts kit collecting. And I bought an unfired, demilled Yugoslavian M92 parts kit. That's how you play the game. And I got a triangle folder from a Bulgarian AK-74 to kind of do what we call in the AK collecting game a Khyber Pass build, because I don't like underfolders. So I got that together. Got about $400 in it at that point. And quite frankly, because I was so intimidated by the process of going through NFA, I really didn't do anything about it. I sat on it. And nothing really progressed until my AK collecting fire was rekindled late last year. And in November of 2014, I started the serious research on how to make this happen. And it started with doing the living trust. So I went through the process of researching that. And in January 2015, I finally decided on the method for the living trust, and I began the process to create it. I mean, that's a good 3 months right there. Of course, it was the holidays, but I spent 3 months just trying to figure out which trust thing I was going to do. Then in late January of 2015, I paid $125 and received my living trust document from our very own Dean Phillips of NFAlawyers.com, who did our first NFA show. And then it was early February 2015. I needed to go have my living trust notarized, and I began research on how to do that. And within a week, I had that accomplished. I had to go to my bank to get that done. And they actually did it for free in 30 minutes. That's one of the fastest parts of this process for me and most carefree. That was really nice. And a little bit later, I went on to the ATF website, and I found that the E-Form 4 that I was trying to fill out was just too confusing for me. Off to YouTube I was to watch videos on how to fill it out, and I spent a couple of hours doing that, and using the videos and other sources, I managed to get the E-Form submitted and the $209 paid, and I'm currently waiting for my tax stamp. So here's the deal. I don't like that. That was not fun. That was an onerous process, in my opinion, and I started to ask the question, why? Why am I having to do this? Why do I have to do this for a suppressor? Why do I have to do it for a short-barreled anything? And I found the whole thing to be wrought with confusion, and it's intimidating, to be frank. I was intimidated. And I can see how most folks look at this and just throw their hands up and say, I'm not going to bother with this NFA thing. It's just not worth it. And I started to think, that's a great way to do gun control. So now we come to you, Knox, and we ask, after our first show of what is it, our second show of how did we get here, now we're going to ask the question, how do we change this situation?
First and foremost, it's education. That encompasses everything from consumers to legislators to rule makers across the country. An educational push is being made by our organization and other organizations trying to basically explain what suppressors are. We specifically deal with suppressors. We don't really handle the other components of the National Firearms Act very much outside of shall sign or shall certify legislation. But education has got to be the cornerstone behind changing these onerous firearms laws.
Knox, what do you mean by shall certify?
Shall certify or shall sign legislation refers to legislation that would require chief law enforcement officers to sign off applications for applicants trying to buy an NFA item who are not legally prohibited from doing so. Basically, as part of the Form 4 process, applicants have to submit to their chief law enforcement officer, solicit a signature, basically saying that suppressors or NFA items are legal in their jurisdiction and that they're not going to be used for unlawful purposes to their knowledge. Remember that this was instituted in 1934 as part of the original National Firearms Act. At that time, computers didn't exist. Background checks didn't exist. But it's something that's completely antiquated. At the time, in 1934, it was the only way to vet potential applicants. Now, the ATF and the FBI query 5 different background check systems for every applicant, making this an onerous and redundant step that adds nothing to public safety.
Yeah, so the whole shall certify thing kind of sounds like to me the shall issue thing that we've had come up in a lot of states where states wouldn't issue a concealed carry permit because they felt you had to have a need to do it. So shall issue kind of put that to rest, and they are due to give you a concealed carry permit as long as you are not a criminal. So this sounds like I'm moving to try to do the same thing. Is that right?
Yeah, that's absolutely correct.
And who all is shall certify right now? We got what? I think it's 4 states?
Right now, there are 8 states where it's been enacted. And actually, on Monday, Arkansas, Governor Hutchinson over there signed the 9th shall sign bill into law. So right now, you've got Alaska, Arizona, Kansas, Kentucky, Ohio, Oklahoma, Tennessee, and Utah.
How does it feel to have that in Arkansas now, Kevin?
Oh, it's great. We're getting a lot of pro-gun bills passed and signed by the governor this session.
Yeah, Arkansas is on the move. I like it.
So the thing that gets me about all this stuff, and you're absolutely right when you say it's about education. How do we do the education? There is so much money being spent misleading people into seeing all these items. Well, it doesn't matter to me whether it's a suppressor, a 30-round magazine, an AR-15. They're being trained to see all this stuff as scary. How do we untrain them?
Well, I believe Knox has some excellent ideas on that. And he told me about one when I got here today that I was actually kind of surprised about. So run down the education piece for us, Knox. What are all the prongs of the approach?
So for us, our primary tool for education is taking people out to the range and going on firearm suppressor demos and shoots. One of the things that we like to do is take legislators from different states that we're working out and let them see and hear them firsthand for themselves. Most of the misconceptions that we're trying to break are based on the thought that Hollywood is accurate, which is a ridiculous thought to have. But for most people, their only exposure to suppressors is through film. So taking folks out, letting them shoot and hear for themselves really is by far our most effective tool. Taking that down another step for our consumers, this industry is really starting to come into its own. They're becoming more and more widespread, more and more common. And as more people start using suppressors, exposure to other shooters who might not have necessarily seen them before really kind of increases the education.
Sure.
So 10 years ago, if you went out to a shooting range, I think that none of us would have seen a suppressor outside of the enthusiastic machine gun collector. Today, if you go to a range, almost every time you'll see at least somebody with a suppressor. And as a shooting enthusiast, one of the things that we all fall victim to is wanting that next cool new thing. You see somebody else that has a neat gun that you like, you go do your research on it, and you go want to buy it. When people see and hear suppressors and see what they do, especially when they're shooting in indoor ranges, which are becoming more and more common as outdoor ranges are being forced to close for noise ordinances, they realize the benefits that it has. And with things like NFA trusts, the ability to purchase a suppressor has become a lot easier.
On my last couple of visits to my local range here, there have been people there with suppressors, and to experience them firsthand is the best. And after having had that experience, I'm on board now. I'm going to go through the process of getting one myself.
Well, there you go.
Excellent.
That's what it's all about. You get it out in the open, get it out in front of people, and people start to experience the benefits of it. I love this picture of a bunch of lawmakers at a gun range with suppressed firearms shooting them and having a great time. I just when Knox mentioned that, I was like, oh, I want a picture of that. So what are they like? What is it actually like when you're at the range with them? Do they get kind of goofy and have a good time, or do they act all cool?
Oh, man, it runs the gamut. You've got everybody doing all sorts of different things. I think the most fun thing for me personally is taking out legislators who are typically anti-gun, who want nothing to do with firearms, who may have never even shot at all, and they shoot them and they say, well, what's the big deal? And that's exactly what we're asking to.
Exactly. Yeah. What is the big deal? I mean, really, we've talked about this several times on this show when we talk about education. There's no greater weapon pardon the pun, in the Second Amendment struggle than having people just go do it, because it's just fun.
Yep.
And it's become such a not normal thing over the past few decades that far too many people are just completely unfamiliar with it, and they're so easily influenced by bad logic from the other side that they just don't know.
Well, see, that's the thing that's hitting me real hard here, is that we started the episode with the story of the grandfather's collection of firearms, and as a little kid going and visiting and seeing the Eddie Eagle videos and learning about gun safety and understanding that guns are just a normal part of life. But there's so many people in the society now that aren't going to have that experience, that are adults now, that have never been in the same room with a gun, at least not knowingly. And those are the people we've got to reach out and educate too, because it's great to get the lawmakers. I take nothing away from that. But they've still got to get reelected. And if they're dealing with a constituency that's been brainwashed into hating guns, we've got to get to the constituency too. And I'm still struggling with how to do that. It'd be great to get every person to arrange. But realistically, obviously, we've got to start somewhere. But I don't know how we ever get the population at large, because that's who we've got to ultimately reach to reverse this.
Yeah, no, I think that you're absolutely right. I think for this particular issue, one of the things that we've got going for us is that over the past several years, the suppressor market's been the fastest growing segment of the firearms industry.
And that's cool. I didn't know that until today.
Yeah, we're experiencing about a 33% growth annually over the past, I think, 7 years.
Excellent.
So it's exploding, and that's with these onerous regulations. That's with...
No pun intended there, right? It's exploding. I'm sorry. I couldn't help myself.
Bullets don't explode. They expand gas rapidly in a directed manner, okay? And this is something that's really popped up in my head about this thing, especially with suppressors. And I believe that suppressors are by far the best way to lead with this fight, because it's such a good wedge. When we heard about the history of how suppressors got involved in this, when you look at it, it's almost like it was thrown in as an afterthought, and they just got caught up in it. It's silly that suppressors are part of this, so it's the perfect thing to lead with,
right,
to change this NFA situation. I mean, we've got, let's protect people's hearing. Shooters, people that are in close association with people who are shooting recreationally, we need to protect everyone's hearing. It's a great way to do it. And for hunting, we see a big rise in suppressors for hunting, and that just makes everybody's time better. It only just makes sense. How do you feel, Knox, about suppressors as the wedge to change this NFA situation?
Oh, I think it's absolutely the wedge. I think that in terms of the other NFA items, this one really kind of sticks out. It's technically classified as a firearm, but it's the only item in NFA other than destructive devices or some AOWs that you can't put a bullet in and pull a trigger and have it shoot. It's an accessory. It was designed by Hiram Maxim at the turn of the 20th century to make shooting friendly to your neighbors. And one of my favorite stories is Teddy Roosevelt used to love shooting his Winchester 1893 with a Maxim suppressor on it because he didn't want to upset his neighbors, the Tiffanys, on Long Island.
God, if we could have a president like that right now.
It's a shame that his long-lost cousin, FDR, actually passed the National Firearms Act in 1934. So we've kind of got both sides with the Roosevelt family.
Yeah. I just imagine a really pro-gun president. I know I'm imagining it, but I imagine a really pro-gun president getting into office and turning that bowling alley in the basement of the White House into an indoor shooting range. That's one of my fantasies. Maybe a .22 long rifle range, out in the White House lawn. A boy can dream, a boy can dream. All right. So education, obviously, big piece of this. We've discussed this on the show in past episodes a lot. It's always about making people aware, because that's our number one weapon. Is this stuff is just fun. It's cool. It's fun. It's got practical aspects for self-defense and for keeping, your government in check. But it's just fun. I mean, that's why most people own and shoot firearms, is because it's a blast. It's just a good time. All right. So Knox, imagine if we're going to change this, politics is involved, obviously. And there are probably times that we can think of in the past where trying to change this whole NFA situation and use your suppressor as a wedge would have not been a very good idea because of the political climate. Tell me what your views are on political climate and how and when things should be prosecuted to try to change NFA.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that waiting for the right political climate is absolutely essential, whether we're looking at making change on the state or the federal level. Every state is different. every state has its own odd idiosyncrasies that we have to take into account. Some states, it's more beneficial for us to come in with a sledgehammer and try and get the public actively and vocally engaged. Some states, it's better for us to try and fly under the radar and get things changed quietly, pardon my pun. And that's something that we have to consider, and that's something that we do consider for every action that we're taking.
Knox, are there suppressor jokes? Is there suppressor humor?
Yeah, absolutely.
I was just, when you said that, I was just thinking, I bet there are suppressor jokes. We won't go into that now, though. We don't have time. So, yeah, political climate's really important, obviously, and maybe things are turning this way for us right now. I don't know. Peter, Kevin, you got anything?
When I look at the politics, I always come back to the same thing. Trying to get the average member of the public to start thinking in terms of, what if you had to fill out a bunch of forms and get a background check done and get a tax stamp before you were allowed to publicly blog on the internet, or before you were allowed to worship at a particular church, or before you were allowed to watch television? If the government started controlling things like religion and speech the way they control firearms and firearms accessories, people would be so pissed that they'd be advancing on the White House and on their state capitals like the villagers in a Frankenstein movie. And the problem here is simply that not enough people today use guns to have them be a household item, like an internet connection or a television set. So we're the ones who sit here going, this is ridiculous, it's an infringement, it's common sense that the laws shouldn't be this way. I know I'm a broken record, but I keep coming back to the same thing of we've got to make that light bulb go on for everybody. That's what's going to change the politics.
Kevin, how has political environment in Arkansas helped you guys there?
Well, it's made all the difference in the world. We did get a very good governor in this last election, and we got a very good legislature. And most of them really seem to get it. They seem to understand what guns are and what they're for, and that most of us are law-abiding citizens. And so the legislation that they're putting forward reflects that.
Yeah, I think that one thing to consider is that in large part, I think that our country's kind of moved away from the necessity of having firearms as an everyday item, especially in urban areas. People in urban areas aren't necessarily going out and hunting. They're not growing up shooting, like you mentioned earlier.
Right.
And I think that presents a bit of an issue for our advocacy efforts. One of the states where we're working, Illinois, if you were to take the Chicago area out of the mix, Illinois would be an entirely pro-gun state.
Oh, exactly. And by the way, that's one of the things we talk about on the show a lot, is that when you go into a lot of these anti-gun states, there are focal centers of anti-gunness that reach out from that point, Chicago being the obvious one in Illinois. And then the rest of the state is normal.
Yeah, and to kind of piggyback off your statement as well, I think that that's the same in other states where we're working. Look at states like Minnesota. If you could do it in California, take L.A. and San Francisco out of the mix,
Yep.
Suppressors would be legal tomorrow.
Yep.
That's just not a reality that we have, though, and it's something that we have to find solutions for. I think that our issue in particular is unique in as much as a lot of these states have overly burdensome health laws, and that's something that I think that we can certainly use to our advantage to help shape the political climate.
Okay, so yeah, right political climate, extremely important. It looks like things are turning our way for the most part, but we do have this nasty presidential election thing coming up, which is getting really interesting. If everyone remembers the episode that Peter and I did where we talked presidential politics for a little bit, I might be proved wrong this time around.
Well, that was before private email servers and a bunch of other stuff came
Yeah,
out.
there were two things that I wouldn't know about, and regardless of what you think, I'm just cold, hard political strategist when it comes to this stuff. But I didn't know Jeb Bush might be entering the race, and I didn't know that Hillary was going to pull a Clinton. And, if you're a Clinton, don't pull a Clinton, because that's exactly what the other side's going to be counting on. So yeah, it's getting interesting. I love that. I would love to be wrong about my prediction. But yeah, if we could get a positive Second Amendment president in office, I really believe we could make some serious change. And with that in mind, let's just say that happened. Sounds like that'd be a good time to change something, the right time to take action. And Knox, I think you got some feelings on the right time to take action in this game. Tell us what you think about that.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of the work that we do, a lot of the work that's done by other advocacy groups, you're really waiting on timing. And that's not to say that you're just sitting back and kind of twiddling your thumbs waiting for something to happen, but it all kind of plays together. Going out and educating the right people, going out and trying to shape the political climate, it all kind of goes hand in hand. All of the advocacy work that we do, all of the work that we do is really focused on ultimately legalizing suppressors in all 50 states for ownership, hunting, and getting them removed from the NFA. I think that it's easy to lose sight of that when we're getting down in the weeds on some of these particular issues, but everything that we do is trying to set ourselves up for success when the right time comes. And I think that one of the most important things that we do, and it's obviously a debate that we have internally, is trying to figure out when the right time to make specific pushes is.
Yeah, that's one of the really frustrating things about the Second Amendment activism game is, it takes a long time.
Yeah, it sure does.
And I really want stuff to change, and I know that this is a lifelong struggle. I'll teach it to my daughter. Hopefully she'll pick it up. This never ends, but you want it to change now. And if you're passionate about it, it's hard. It's hard to sit back and know that you got to wait for the right time to do things. But there's probably a little bit of struggle in the Second Amendment community right now. I think we've seen that in Texas with open carry about how do we get open carry in Texas. Well, there was a couple of different approaches. I don't know which one won the day, but it's changing. There was kind of a more subtle approach and there was a more overt approach. And that's a struggle, I think, within the Second Amendment community is timing and being patient. And it's tough to be patient sometimes. Yeah, so Knox, when you guys are thinking about making a push for something, and imagine you probably got some long-range planning in your head, but are you watching the news and all of a sudden you're like, now's the time to make a move? Or is this something that's just really methodical for you?
It's both. I think that certainly sometimes opportunities kind of fall into your lap and you have to be ready to take them and run with them. I think overall, go back to the fable, slow and steady wins the race. This isn't always going to be a sprint. We're certainly going to try and affect change and pass pro-suppressor legislation and reform as quickly as we can. But at the same time, we don't want to accidentally shoot ourselves in the foot because we overextend ourselves or because we move something prematurely. I think that a second point to that is that we can't let perfection be the enemy of the good. If we hold out and try and say, we're not going to take anything until we get everything, it's going to be very hard for us to eventually get to where we want to go. So taking victories where we can get them and advancing it one step at a time is really the method that we've chosen and the approach that we choose to have.
Can't let perfection be the enemy of the good. I like that. The other thing that I'm seeing in the struggle, and I'm seeing it more and more, and you see it more in different parts of the country than others, is that we are sometimes at risk of splintering. I see it here in Connecticut. You have two primary groups that are pro-2A. One are the open carry proponents that say, if we go into Starbucks and we're all carrying AR-15s and we hang out there, we'll make AR-15s normal. And you have the other group that says, don't do that because it'll scare everybody and we'll get even more anti-gun activism. You get those two groups pissed at each other because they disagree on strategy, and all of a sudden, instead of putting their energy toward fighting the fight, they're conflicting with each other. Meanwhile, the anti-gunners have a unified, consistent message, and they just keep on marching along. And we've really got to be cognizant of that, is that, what did Ben Franklin say? We have to all hang together because otherwise we will surely hang separately.
Yeah, well, it's easy for the antis to have a unified message because they just make it up out of thin air.
Exactly.
It has nothing to do with facts.
No. No, it's dogma is what it is.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So, Knox, that's actually a really important thing, and I think that's something we should talk about now, and that is the gun community. And getting everyone to be politically active and to act as one, to be a part of the struggle and to have everyone move along for the same ends. And yeah, it's America and everybody's going to have different opinions and we're going to disagree. And that's what we do. That's part of the process. But Second Amendment community, we got to be efficient with how we do this. And Knox, do you have any thoughts on how we can do that efficiently as a single community, as one voice?
Yeah, I think that's the million-dollar question. I think that it's certainly something that we all want, at least in the advocacy community, is that we all want to be able to work together because more or less we all want the same things to happen. The debate becomes approach, and I think that it's going to be a tough debate to finish, because you're always going to have people who want to engage more militantly, who want to be very vocal, and there's a time and a place for that, but it's not always the case. And being able to analyze when certain approaches are going to be more or less effective, and when it's better to just sit back and say, okay, we need to let things take its course. It's a tough question, and it's always going to be I think part of the problem is that a lot of times we have too many chiefs trying to act as the leader. And not to say that there's not a necessity for a lot of different groups, because there are a lot of different groups who have a lot of different aims. Our aims are pretty narrowly focused. You've got groups like NRA whose aims are incredibly broad. And we work with other groups like the Congressional Sportsmen's Foundation who look at this through the lens of sportsmen's heritage and protecting that. So there's a lot of different applications for a lot of different people. But I think that one of the worst things that we as a community do is really kind of cannibalize our own efforts and undercut each other in an attempt to establish either our names or our groups as kind of a front runner. And that's something that we see quite a bit.
Yeah, I think the most recent M855 attempted ban by the ATF that was proposed, I think everybody saw that the same way, and everybody went bananas, and they just inundated the ATF with comments about this. Inundated their lawmakers with complaints and information, and Congress got on board. Everybody kind of moved together and acted as one, and we saw some change quick. It happened fast. That's probably going to come back again later, but I really felt like in that particular situation, everyone saw that the same way, saw it for what it was, and acted as one to do something about it. And God, if we could just do that consistently, if there's a way to marshal that.
Yes, over 300,000 comments at the ATF website, most of them very much against this ban.
Yeah, too bad we couldn't have done that for 7 and 6 for the AK community, but whatever. Yeah, definitely gun community acting as one would be a huge help in this situation, would help use that suppressor wedge and get some other things freed up. And we've been talking about suppressors primarily, Knox, obviously, because we're at the American Suppressor Association. But what we've been speaking of, how do you feel that applies to the short-barreled rifles, short-barreled shotguns, and the other items that are included in NFA? Do you see these all the same?
I think there are certainly some differences. I think that the inclusion of short-barrel rifles and short-barreled shotguns is a bit ridiculous. Back in 1934, when they were debating this, originally pistols were to be included in the National Firearms Act. They included short-barrel rifles and short-barrel shotguns so that there wouldn't be a workaround. I think that once pistols were taken out, leaving them in was almost negligent legislative drafting. But I think that of the NFA items, suppressors are probably the most likely to be removed, and following that would be short-barrel rifles and short-barreled shotguns.
It's insane that they just got wrapped up in it. I mean, it looks like to me they just got wrapped up in a push to ban handguns, to tightly regulate handguns. They just got caught up in it, and they were left behind. And it makes me sick when I think about it.
I think keep in mind that back in 1934, the FDR administration was looking to out-and-out ban firearms. They didn't have the authority to do so, and they knew that, so they did the next best thing. They highly taxed it and regulated it. At the time, $200 tax stamp was equivalent to about $3,500 today. If they were to do that, it would cripple this part of the industry. And FDR knew that. It was entirely calculated on his part, and something that only now is really why this side of the industry, the NFA community, is really coming into its own.
Yeah. And we're still living with it. God, after decades and decades.
At least they didn't adjust it for inflation.
Yeah, no kidding.
Knock on wood.
Thank goodness. Yeah, don't let that happen, Knox. All right. Well, in our second show, we learned about a lot of this history you were just speaking about, Knox. And we did that with someone that I refer to as the most interesting man in the world, and that is Dean Weingarten. And he's very humble. When I gave him a chance to give his kind of bio and resume, he left a whole lot of stuff out in that episode. You should look up Dean and learn about his past. He's an amazing human being. He really wanted to be a part of this show, but couldn't join us. So last night, I pre-recorded a little segment. He had some thoughts he wanted to share with everyone, and I think based on what we just heard, I think he's got some things to add. So we're going to include that now, so I'm going to drop you into last night with Dean and myself. Here we go. So, Dean, you said you had some thoughts on how we could change this whole NFA situation, how we could turn this around and get some of our freedom back. And I'd like you to share that with us now. So what are your thoughts?
Well, first, I think that the actions that are being taken now, the lobbying of individual states to roll back some of the regulation of suppressors, is working very well, and we need to continue that. There's around 33, 34 states now where it's legal to hunt with suppressors, and we want to expand that and incrementally improve upon it where we need to. Then another tact that can be taken, and I think it has possibilities, is state nullification of federal NFA laws for suppressors and short-barreled rifles and shotguns. We actually had a bill introduced here in Arizona this year that did that. It just said, we're not going to make suppressors or short-barreled rifles and shotguns illegal anymore. We're going to remove our state legislation from it. And we also had a bill that said that on gun laws, state officers would not cooperate with federal officers. This is a perfectly legal tactic. It's well vetted in the courts. The federal government can't force the states to do stuff. And if the federal enforcers have to rely on themselves, it's very difficult for there to be any practical enforcement. Then we have the court track, which has got some good, surprising news. We have this case, Hollis v. Holder in North Dallas. You might recall there was a ruling recently in the North Dallas District Court that said that the regulation preventing the sale, actually it's federal law, part of GCA 68, that prevents the sale of handguns to qualified buyers interstate is unconstitutional. And that is that if you're a qualified buyer, you should be able to buy a handgun anywhere in the country. Building on that is this Hollis v. Holder case, which says that the way the BATF is applying the 1986 law, which says that they can only allow people to have fully automatic guns, machine guns and such, if they were built. Actually, it says if they were approved of by a government process. And the ATF has taken that to mean that they will only allow new machine guns to go to government agencies. Well, this case, Hollis v. Holder, basically says that's nonsense. It doesn't meet the rules required to abridge a fundamental right, and that it could be far less onerous. And that's a great case that looks promising. Then another case that's highly useful is the Sig Sauer versus BATF, where they're trying to build on their legalized arm brace for pistols. Since the ATF followed the letter of the law there, they're saying, okay, we have a muzzle brake. Now, it turns out their muzzle brake also makes a pretty good component for a suppressor or a gun muffler if you put a can over it. But by itself, it doesn't reduce the noise at all. And they're trying to make BATF follow their own rules and make it legal to have this muzzle brake as part of a firearms barrel. That way you can have essentially what is much like a short-barreled rifle, but it already has a muzzle brake that extends the barrel from, say, 10 inches to 16 inches. And if you want to register a gun muffler, all you have to do is register the outer tube, buy that outer tube, and screw it on over the muzzle brake, and you've got a fairly effective gun muffler. So that type of thing will degrade the whole idea of what the regulation is about, which never made any sense in the first place. There's another court case where the court held that the BATF has to follow the rules for federal regulation. It's Innovative Firearms versus the United States. And basically what the judge said in that case is that the BATF can't just pick and choose how to obey the law. They actually have to be something other than arbitrary and capricious. So holding them to rulings, which we really haven't done in the past, they've been extremely arbitrary and capricious over the last at least 30 years. That's a good tact. Okay, the other thing that besides the court cases, state nullification, state legislative relief is, of course, everybody needs to educate people who don't know about the irrationality of the NFA and the 1986 law. One of the best ways to do this for activists is to comment on articles in the papers, from a local news report, anywhere you can make a comment, explain to people that it's stupid and irrational to prevent people from having the safety of gun mufflers, that short-barreled rifles and shotguns are no different functionally than a small rifle or a large pistol, and it makes no sense to regulate them differently than we do pistols now, or rifles or shotguns. Of course, if you have the means and ability, write and publish factual articles explaining what NFA is. When people find out what it is and what it does, especially in terms of short-barreled rifles and shotguns and gun mufflers, they come over to our side. Use European examples. Explain how in Europe a gun muffler is just another accessory, like a scope or a sling, and you can buy it out of a gun store to put on your firearm without any trouble. Okay, we've covered the local and the types of things you need to do as an activist. Also, what we need to do is have a congressional or a federal component to this. We should be looking for model legislation to reform the NFA. And preferably this would be pushed by everybody involved, both the SAF and the NRA and the suppressor organizations and all the local groups. And it would be something we could get behind. We should be trying to push for as much as possible. Do away with the 1986 restriction, make short-barreled rifles and shotguns no more regulated than pistols, and do away with the regulation on gun mufflers altogether. It never made any sense. There's a way we can accomplish a lot of this in real terms without going through the congressional process, without even passing a law. And it won't do a permanent fix, but it'll move us along in the right direction a long way. And that is in the 68 law, there's a provision for amnesties. Basically, the Secretary of the Treasury, as I read it, can declare a 90-day amnesty so that anybody who has illegal items, such as unregistered machine gun, short-barreled rifle or shotgun or gun muffler, can go to the BATF and get them registered. He just declares an amnesty. You go in and do it. As a practical matter, it would maybe double or triple the amount of legal automatic weapons, short-barreled rifles and shotguns, and gun mufflers. And this can be done by executive action. It only takes the Secretary of the Treasury to do it. It doesn't even have to be a presidential directive. What we should be doing is pushing presidential candidates to make a pledge that they would support bringing illegal guns onto the federal registry or something like that. Maybe we can come up with a little better phrase, but something that is difficult for the other side to demonize. Of course, they demonize everything, but basically, if you're saying to try to bring illegal guns into the legal realm or something like that, and have every presidential candidate, on the conservative side anyway, vow that they would direct the Secretary of the Treasury to have an amnesty for 90 days. Preferably, we'd have one every year. As a practical matter, if you have an amnesty, what will happen is that everybody who wants something or has a grandfather's war trophy in the attic, most of them, will bring it in because the $200 tax is not onerous anymore. And a lot of those guns are worth significant money now. So that's what we should be pushing for. Those actions, state legislative relief, state nullification, court cases, educate on the irrationality of the NFA, and the two federal actions, push for a bill to reform the NFA and for federal amnesty are what I think can move us forward.
All right. Well, that's what the most interesting man in the world thinks about how to change this whole NFA situation. And he just created a whole other show just then.
Yeah, he sure did.
Yeah, so we can't obviously explore all of that, but I'd like to just go around the horn before we end here with this episode, and everybody can just kind of share something that they thought about what Dean had to say. And I'm going to start with, I love how he opened up with the state approach. And I love the idea of whittling away at this thing on the state level. Just start taking out state at a time. Make it less and less of a reality NFA in America and do that one state at a time. I think that's something that can be done relatively now and can be seen and felt as real progress and start to build some momentum. People are really starting to talk about NFA and starting to go, wait a minute, what is this? I mean, I'm one of them. I went through the process and I'm asking the questions, why am I doing this? This is ridiculous. Why am I doing this? And people are starting to discuss this, and this momentum is starting to build. And if we could go at a state at a time and just start to say, hey, Georgia, we're not going to participate, okay? Thanks anyway. And start to make it less and less of a valid kind of situation in the United States, I think that would make a huge difference in this fight. Kevin, you're up.
Okay. First of all, everything Dean just said pretty much blew my mind. And I get the feeling that talking for 10 minutes for Dean is effortless. I think he could go on for hours, It's just, I really hadn't considered anything that he talked about. One of the things that stuck out to me that I had no idea about was the availability of suppressors in Europe, that they're just considered an accessory. That's really wild to me.
Yeah, I hadn't heard about that either.
Yep. And that, to add on that, it's not every European country, but there are a lot where suppressors are oftentimes mandated.
Wow. Wouldn't that be nice?
Oh, it would.
Yeah, go ahead, Kevin.
I had no idea that SIG was working on this muzzle brake that could be, well, you put a can on it and now it's a suppressor.
Yeah.
So SIG is doing some good things too. And I don't know, I just found the whole thing that Dean was talking about really fascinating.
Oh, yeah. Knox, is SIG helping the situation?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, they're really serving to kind of poke the bear right now, so to speak. But I think that it's good for everybody. It keeps everyone on their toes. And it's a bear that should be prodded,
Yeah, it makes me feel good. Somebody that's got some money, that's got something to lose, is just going like, here you go, ATF, do something with this. I love that they're in the fight with us. What'd you get from that, Peter?
Well, one thing that jumped out at me was the public education piece. I'm actually already doing that. I think probably several of us are, that when you see a newspaper article or some kind of a public article, almost all of them have online comment sections, and making a rational, well-reasoned argument to point out the irrationality of these laws makes a lot of sense. I'd add to that, though, the one thing that he didn't say, which is you kind of have to be careful where you do that. I probably wouldn't bother, let's say, commenting on an anti-gun article in, let's say, the Huffington Post.
Oh, you beat me to it.
Because you know what's going to happen. You see it coming. You get all the crazies on there, and all they're going to do is pile on. And you make your well-reasoned argument, and then they throw a whole bunch of absolutely fake bullshit dogma on top of it and say, but that's the truth, and you're just one of those gun nuts. It's pointless. But there are so many other locations, whether it's not necessarily either Fox News, because that's just going to be dismissed as they're on our side, but there are a lot of neutral public locations, even CNN's website, where I've seen these debates actually be fairly rational, and it's the antis that come across like the nutcases. And I think the more that we do of that kind of thing without losing our temper, I think that's huge. He's actually the first person that I've heard really push for that. And tied to that, obviously, yeah, of course we need congressional movement to reform or repeal the law. And we may be moving toward a time when we can do that. We've got conservative majorities in both houses now. We're coming up on a presidential election. Maybe the Obamas and the Clintons really did shoot themselves enough in the foot, or hopefully the ass, to just do themselves out of office. And maybe, if conservatives don't completely fumble the ball, we might see gun-friendly, or should I rather say rights-friendly majorities in both houses of Congress and the White House, and then possibly as additional justices retire from the Supreme Court, we might increase a majority of rational people on the Supreme Court too. Yeah. And we may really be right around the corner from being able to do some of these things. I look at it as a chess game, but it's a chess game played over a lifetime. And instead of individual players on each side of the board, you have teams, and they're huge teams. And that's why it takes so long to play. But we've got to play to win. We've got to. They are.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Speaking of the education thing, I think folks can participate in more ways than they know. And our very own Kevin has been on his own little 2A crusade there in Arkansas. And Kevin, tell the folks how you've been forwarding the Second Amendment cause in education in Arkansas.
I've just been writing letters to the editor, and our paper here, pretty small, maybe 25,000 circulation. And surprisingly, to me, they've been very open to publishing my pro-gun letters. And I kind of feel an NFA letter coming on.
Yeah, I've read Kevin's stuff, and it's excellent. He basically just lays out a very concise, logical argument with no emotion to it. Just basically, this is what's going on. And I read it, and I go, God, he's right. And I'm already there.
Well, thank you for that.
Yeah. So there are more ways than you can imagine to get the word out there. And letters to the editor, that's a great way to do it. And Kevin's been able to make a difference in Arkansas just doing that. So, Knox, that was a mouthful from Dean right there. I told him he had to keep it to 10 minutes, and he literally kept it to 10 minutes. I think he was watching the clock because I know he could have gone for 20 or 30. But from what you heard, what are some high points that you got from Dean that you'd want to discuss with us?
Well, I think in large part that he's correct, that it's going to be a multi-pronged approach, and that there's a lot of ways to skin this particular cat. I think that it kind of ties back to the points that we were talking about earlier, where education and timing are everything. Being able to set up the chessboard so that we can make the move to win the game. It's not going to happen overnight. It's not a simple process, and there's a lot of different moves that we can make that we need to be making. And I think that we need to kind of look at it, look forward, look towards our end goal, and continue to pursue it unfettered. I do think one of the pieces that Dean was talking about was the state nullification of the National Firearms Act. And I think that in principle it's a good idea, but I think that in practice it introduces a host of issues for people who want to go out and purchase these NFA items. Whether we like it or not, NFA items like suppressors are federally regulated. And if state officials aren't able to sign off on forms, then there's going to be a host of people who want to buy these items who can't, especially if pending rulemaking in the form of ATF 41P goes into effect. You're going to have a lot of people who can't buy NFA items who want them. And it's a similar theory to Colorado's approach to marijuana, where it might be legal in the state, but it's still federally illegal. I know that personally I wouldn't want to be the person buying a suppressor without going through the NFA and acting as a guinea pig, because if the federal government wanted to, they could certainly come down on you. It's just something that I think that we should be cognizant of, that yes, I think we can all agree that the NFA in general should be dissolved, but that doesn't change the reality of the situation that we're in.
So, yeah, we'll have to leave it there. We're out of time. This has been an incredible show, but we got to wrap it up. And I want to thank each and every one of you for joining me today. Thank you, Kevin. Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Knox. Thank you for hosting us for this show. And I'm going to give everybody a chance to plug the thing they do so people can get in touch with your efforts. And I'll start with you, Knox. Tell us about the ASA and what you got going on.
So the American Suppressor Association is a nonprofit trade group. We represent the firearm suppressor industry, and that's everyone from dealers to distributors, manufacturers, and consumers. Our mission is to advocate on behalf of everybody for pro-suppressor reform. If you'd like, visit us online, www.americansuppressораssociation.com. We'd love for you to join our association. We offer public memberships. We also offer corporate memberships, and those funds go directly towards our advocacy efforts.
And they got some really neat stickers, too. I'm looking at a bin of a whole bunch of them in here. I got to get me one of those. Kevin, tell the folks what you're up to.
Well, for lovers of the KSG shotgun, I've started building Kydex receiver covers in multiple colors for that shotgun. So those are available at eBay for anyone who needs one.
And how do they find that?
Just search for KSG Kydex cheek cover at eBay and it'll pop up.
They're very cool. And if you've ever shouldered a KSG shotgun, and I just got to do that recently, there's a piece of metal right by your cheek and it's really cold. And evidently as you shoot it, it gets very hot.
It sure does.
Yeah. So Kydex is just kind of in the middle. Isn't that right?
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Feels good against the cheek.
That should be your slogan. Kevin's Kydex KSG covers. Feels good on the cheek.
I'll get a trademark for that.
I want a piece of it. All right. And we're saving Peter Gould for last because I want to hear this story. So what you been up to, Peter?
Well, for quite a while now, we've been developing a feature-length theatrical documentary on the Second Amendment called Infringed, Second Amendment in the Crosshairs. But we have temporarily put that a little bit more on a back burner while we do a couple other things to raise our efforts a little bit more into the forefront of the Second Amendment community nationwide. At the moment, we are working on a series of videos in Connecticut on how Connecticut law and Connecticut's administration have been really harming lawful gun owners who haven't done anything wrong. There are some really hair-raising stories coming out of our effort in Connecticut that we are dramatizing and putting in documentary form. I think maybe my favorite, and I'll do this real quick, is a guy who was told by the state police that he had a restraining order against him, which meant he had to surrender all of his firearms, and not understanding why he would have a restraining order against him, but being told he had a very brief time to do this before he became a felon. He surrendered his firearms. Then it turns out he didn't have a restraining order against him. They were wrong. Here's the problem. He had legally owned, properly registered, so-called assault weapons. And now that they're surrendered, they can't give them back, even though the government was wrong and he should never have had to surrender them in the first place. Oh, gee, we're sorry, but you can't have your guns back.
Jeez.
That's the kind of thing that we're trying to bring out in face of the public so that people go, oh, boy, this is government out of control, because it is. So we're in production on that. We've shot a lot of interviews. We have a lot more to do, but these are going to be really cool when we're done.
Yeah, it sounds very cool.
All right. That's what the busiest boy in the world's been doing. All right. Excellent. Okay. Well, if you would like to get in touch with this Second Amendment effort, that is the 2A Today podcast, you can email us at 2atodaypodcast@gmail.com. You can follow us on Twitter at 2AToday, or you can like us on Facebook at facebook.com/2AToday. And 2A Today is spelled the number 2, the letter A, the letter T, and O-Day, all together as one word, 2A Today. Links to every episode go up on Twitter and Facebook, but the easiest way to get the show is to subscribe to 2A Today on iTunes and leave a rave 5-star review. And we also can be found on TuneIn Radio for all the Android folks out there. All right, well, at the end of every show, we like to leave you, the listening audience, with some words of significance surrounding the Second Amendment. And this episode's 2A quote is going to be delivered again by Kevin. Kevin, what do you got for us?
This quote is from Samuel Adams. "The Constitution shall never be construed to prevent the people of the United States who are peaceable citizens from keeping their own arms."
I thought it was going to be about beer there for a second.
Right.
But that one's even better. All right. So, yeah.
Keeping their own beer, maybe.
All right. Well, that's all the time we've got for the show. I'm your host, YaDaddy, and I'd like to end the show with a simple but very important question. Are we going to be a free people? Knox, are we going to be a free people?
Absolutely. If we all work together, we will.
There it is, folks. Listen to the man. All right. Join us next time on 2A Today, and we will help you answer that question. That's it. 2A Today. Over.